Hi class, and welcome back to American and Texas Government. Professor Robinson here. Today we're going to talk about the constitutional ambivalence of the presidency. So if you think back to our last unit on Congress in Article 1, we studied the actual Constitution quite closely, and one of the reasons we did is because the powers of the Congress are spelled out quite closely, and those specific powers matter very much. When it comes to the presidency, we have a fundamentally different design to the Constitution. It is designed with some ambivalence. In other words, it's not totally clear what exactly the powers of the president in many cases should be. The reason we've done this, if we jump right down here, is because the founders envisioned the presidency to be an energetic office. Think about 9/11 as a fantastic example of this. There are times in the life of a nation where quick, decisive action is needed and necessary, and the long deliberative process provided by Congress can't and shouldn't really play out. So the decision to have all of the planes land immediately when we learn that there are terrorist attacks occurring, right? You can't have Congress deliberate and pass a law, okay? So there are times where it is appropriate for energetic action, and this is the branch of government where we envision this to occur. Now, one quick thing to note here is that our system's really changed over time. The Federalists and one of the criticisms of the Anti-Federalists, for instance, was that they thought that this energetic presidency was a bad idea because they thought over time the system would change. Congress was supposed to be the branch of government that had more power and more attention to it. But if you think about the way our system works today, we all know who the president is. We all pay attention to the president, what he says and what he does. He has a lot more attention given to him. Okay, so one of the perhaps downsides of the energetic presidency is that although it's designed for some specific applications, presidents have perhaps taken advantage of this energy and use it in more cases than is necessary. Indeed, one school of thought says that we now have an imperial presidency, an unconstrained presidency who can act almost like an emperor does, right? So one of the reasons we get there to this sort of structure and nature of contemporary presidential power is because of the design of the presidency. You might call the power provided by an energetic president, John Locke called it the prerogative power. You could define this as the power to act where the law is silent, or the power to act contrary to the law when circumstances dictate. Now, when you do so, the thing that gives it its weight or its justice is your ability to convince or to persuade the necessary audience that what you've done is in the best interest of the American people. Okay? So let's slow down and go back to the Constitution itself really quickly. There are only 4 sections in Article 2. Section 1 talks about the Electoral College and the requirements for office, citizenship, and age requirements. I'll let your textbook take care of that. Section 3 says that the President will provide a State of the Union address and will convene Congress in emergency sessions if necessary. Section 4 gives us the terms to remove the process to remove the President if necessary. Right? Just leaving Section 2 here to talk about his powers. The only specific powers that are laid out, the power to be the commander-in-chief, to make treaties and appoint foreign ambassadors with the consent of the Senate, and the appointment of other public ministers, like his cabinet secretaries and federal judges. So the president, you see, doesn't have very many specific powers laid out to him, and this is what we mean by the energetic presidency. His command and control of the bureaucracy is going to be one of the real sources of power, and it's one of the reasons why that bureaucracy chapter in your textbook is included in this unit and is an important inclusion in this unit. Okay, so let's talk for a second about how this energy sort of translates. For instance, the president can make treaties with the advice and consent of the Senate. Okay, so there's some ambivalence in that. Okay, so let's talk for a second about a couple of like really prominent examples of energetic uses of presidential power. One of your essay questions for this for this unit is designed to get you to investigate one of our instance of aggressive or energetic uses of presidential power in our nation's history. I'll talk very briefly about two of them, but I'll expect you to do a little bit more research and work on this topic on your own. But a proclamation is something that the president issues all by himself. It's kind of like a directive. Congress hasn't approved it, and it doesn't really have the force of law. Okay, most of the time, and it doesn't have the force of law unless Congress goes back and approves it vis-a-vis vote. Most of the time, proclamations accomplish fairly piddly types of law, like you're declaring a celebration, like a holiday, or you're declaring that the flag should be flown at half-mast because of someone's death. Occasionally, however, proclamations are used for really important pieces of policy. Washington issued a Proclamation of Neutrality in 1793. So a war this is early on in our nation's history. We are in debt. We're not very powerful. We're a new fledgling nation. Across the Atlantic, war has broken out between Great Britain and France, two really powerful nations in 1793, and we don't want to get involved in their war at all. The problem is that we had signed a treaty of alliance with France. They came in and helped us out during the Revolutionary War. We probably wouldn't have won without their assistance. So we really owe a debt of gratitude to the French, and a treaty obligates us to get involved in this European war on the French side. So when Washington decides to issue a Proclamation of Neutrality, it was actually an incredibly controversial thing to do. It led to a debate called the Pacificus Helvetius debate between Madison Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton over whether or not the president had the power to act so aggressively on his own. Because if you think about it, getting out of a treaty is a lot like making a treaty. Treaties should be made with the advice and consent of the Senate. But here, Washington is attempting to do this without going through the Senate, because the politics of the Senate are going to make that more difficult. Okay? So here, very early, this is President 1, Term 1, and he's talking about, Term 2. He's talking about unilaterally making an aggressive action in foreign policy without the consent of the Senate. Okay? So it's a prerogative because he's acting in a way here that appears to contradict the bounds of the Constitution. Okay? Now, he does issue the proclamation. In many regards, his detractors, like Jefferson, were correct. One of the arguments against issuing this proclamation is that you're going to tick the French off. They're going to declare war on America. And of course, they subsequently do declare war. They don't declare war, but there's a quasi-war, a pseudo-war between America and France that partly results from us pulling out of this agreement, right? The Emancipation Proclamation of 1863 is another really good example of a forceful, powerful piece of legislation being made vis-a-vis proclamation. Okay, so when Lincoln frees the slaves south of the Mason-Dixon line, and this is done as proclamation. The president declares this unilaterally. Congress doesn't approve this right away. Of course, this is just a wartime measure. We all know that the 13th Amendment passed in '65 is going to be the more effective and permanent measure here, right? But the point is that the president declares it, and it occurs, and it has the force of law, and sets up the stage for the later Emancipation Proclamation. Okay, so again, there are a couple of other examples of this issue area that I encourage you to select one, study it carefully, and craft a thoughtful and intelligent essay. And what I'm really hoping for you to explain here is to figure out, one, not only what happened, but two, how is it that the president did something that he perhaps didn't necessarily have permission to do? Okay. Another area where this sort of energetic presidency comes up is when it comes to the history of declaring war, and I'll try to do this fairly briefly. Article 1, as we recall, gives Congress the power to declare war and to fund the Army and the Navy once they are at war. The President, in Article 2, Section 2, you see it there, is given the power to be the Commander-in-Chief. Once Congress has declared war and sent our troops afield, the President may declare effectively the policy for how the war is to be conducted. Okay? So this is a way in which a separation and a check and balance of power, right? Now, it might interest you to know, might not, but learn it anyway. The last president to seek a declaration of war from Congress was FDR prior to World War II. So that famous speech, December 7, 1941, a date which will live in. He wasn't just saying that. He was in front of a joint session of Congress asking them to declare war against the Empire of Japan for bombing Pearl Harbor. Okay? So that was the last instance. And prior to that, most American wars were declared wars. However, since then, none of the wars that we've been involved in, Korea, Vietnam, the Persian Gulf War, the Kosovo Wars, the Iraq and Afghanistan, none of the wars that we've been involved in have we had Congress issue a declaration of war. Okay? Near the end of the Vietnam War, Congress attempted to take this power back from this sort of unilateral control of the military back from the president by passing the War Powers Resolution. It struck a compromise. It said the president could use the troops for 60 days. After that, he had to come to Congress and get further permission and authorization before he could use the troops any further. Okay. Today we have this this kind of funny compromise between declaring war and not. There's something called an authorization for the use of military force, an AUMF. When President Bush went into Iraq and Afghanistan in 2003, he got an authorization of AUMF for the war on terrorism. Okay, so this isn't an authorization to use force against a specific nation state, it's not like declaring war on Japan, right? So any actor who we can perceive to be a part of this war on terrorism falls under this AUMF. So since 2003, our military undertakings in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, they've all fallen under this general purview of conducting a war on terrorism. Okay, it's an area where occasionally you'll find senators like Rand Paul has been vocal on this issue, who talk about we need to seize this power back from the president and re-engage the sort of balance of power that once occurred between the Congress and the president. But the fact that these debates are occurring really exemplifies how the nature of presidential power has evolved over time. Okay, the ambivalence written into the Constitution in order to to create a president who can act energetically when necessary has really evolved into a president who does act energetically and many times when not necessary. And part of the reason is because the attention given to him gives him the ability to persuade whoever he needs to persuade. And this day and age, President Trump is criticized a lot for his use of Twitter. But if you think about it as a tool for trying to reach an audience, the American people, and persuade them of his policy, it may be a savvier technique than he's given credit for in a lot of occasions. Okay, so as you're moving through the chapters this time on presidency and on the bureaucracy, keep these things in mind, sort of the balance of power and the way that it has changed over time.